Your grandfather left you his entire estate, $4.7 million in assets, including a house, investment accounts, and a small business. But there is one condition. I stared at the man in the expensive suit, certain I was hallucinating. I had not eaten in 2 days. I had been sleeping in my car for 9 nights. I had just spent the last hour digging through a dumpster behind a restaurant, looking for anything edible that had not completely spoiled. And now, this lawyer, this pristine man with his leather briefcase and his silk tie, was telling me I had inherited millions from a grandfather I never knew existed. "I am sorry," I said, my voice cracking from disuse. "I think you have the wrong person. Are you Nathan James Brooks? Born March 15th, son of David Brooks and the late Michelle Brooks." "Yes, but—" "Then I have the right person." He smiled, but it was a professional smile, the kind that did not reach his eyes. "My name is Richard Hartwell. I represent the estate of your grandfather, James Brooks. He passed away 3 weeks ago and named you as his sole heir. I do not have a grandfather. I mean, I did, but my father said he died before I was born." "Your father lied." Richard said it simply, without judgment, like he was stating the weather. "James Brooks was very much alive until 23 days ago. He spent the last 15 years of his life trying to find you. When he finally did, 6 months ago, he immediately changed his will." My head was spinning. None of this made sense. I was standing in a parking lot behind a strip mall, wearing clothes I had not washed in over a week, talking to a lawyer about millions of dollars I had supposedly inherited. Why would he leave everything to me? He did not even know me. That is precisely why he left it to you, because he wanted to know you, and he never got the chance. Richard gestured toward a black sedan parked nearby. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more comfortable. You look like you could use a meal and a shower." I should have been suspicious. I should have questioned everything. But I was 18 years old, homeless, starving, and completely out of options. So I got in the car. That was the moment my life changed forever. But to understand how I ended up in that parking lot, how I went from a normal teenager with a roof over his head to a homeless kid digging through trash, I need to take you back to my 18th birthday. Back to the day my father threw me out. Back to the moment I learned exactly how little I meant to the people who were supposed to love me. My name is Nathan Brooks. I was 18 years old when I became homeless, and 18 years and 9 days old when I discovered I was a millionaire. This is the story of what happened in between and what came after. I grew up believing I was unwanted, not because anyone said it directly, at least not at first, but because everything in my father's house made it clear that I did not belong there. My mother died when I was 4 years old. Cancer, the aggressive kind that takes people quickly. I barely remember her. Just flashes of warmth and softness, and a voice that made me feel safe. A hand stroking my hair when I could not sleep. A laugh that sounded like music. The smell of her perfume when she hugged me goodbye on the last morning I ever saw her conscious. I have one clear memory that has stayed with me all these years. She was sitting on my bed, tucking me in, and she said, "Nathan, no matter what happens, remember that you are loved. You are wanted. You are exactly who you are supposed to be." I clung to those words for the next 14 years. They were all I had of her. After she died, my father fell apart. He stopped going to work for 3 months. He stopped eating regular meals. He stopped looking at me because I had her eyes and her smile, and seeing me was like being stabbed in the heart every single day. Our house became a tomb, full of her photographs and her clothes and the ghost of everything we had lost. Then Patricia arrived. She was a co-worker of my father's, someone from the Human Resources Department who started coming by with casseroles and condolences. Within 6 months, she was spending the night. Within a year, she was moving in. Within 18 months, they were married in a small ceremony at City Hall. I remember standing at that wedding, 5 years old, in a rented suit that did not fit right, watching my father smile at this stranger like she was his whole world, like my mother had never existed, like I was just a leftover from a life he was trying to forget. Patricia was everything my mother apparently was not. Cold where my mother had been warm, calculating where my mother had been kind. She came with a son from a previous marriage, Tyler, who was 7 years old and took an immediate dislike to everything about my existence. The transformation was gradual at first. Small things. My place at the dinner table moved from next to my father to the end of the table, farthest from everyone else. My bedroom was reassigned to Tyler because it was bigger, and I was moved to the smallest room in the house, barely bigger than a closet. My toys began disappearing, given to Tyler, or thrown away without explanation. My father changed after he married Patricia, the man I remembered from before my mother's death, the one who used to carry me on his shoulders and read me bedtime stories, disappeared completely. In his place was someone distant, someone who looked at me like I was a reminder of something he wanted to forget, someone who had chosen his new family over his first one. Patricia made it clear from the beginning that I was tolerated, not welcomed. She never hit me, never did anything that could be called abuse in any legal sense. But she had 1,000 small ways of making me feel invisible. She would set the table for 3 and act surprised when I sat down. She would buy Tyler new clothes and hand me his worn-out cast-offs. She would plan family vacations and forget to book me a seat on the plane. "Sorry, Nathan," she would say with that thin smile she had perfected. "I just did not think." She said that a lot. I just did not think. Like I was so insignificant that my existence simply slipped her mind. Tyler learned from his mother. He broke my things and blamed me for the damage. He ate the food I had been saving in the refrigerator. He told kids at school that I was weird, that my mother had killed herself to get away from me, that nobody in my family actually wanted me around. I learned to make myself small, to stay in my room, to need as little as possible. I learned that asking for anything was an invitation for rejection, that expecting kindness was setting myself up for disappointment. My father watched all of this and did nothing. That was the part that hurt the most, not Patricia's coldness or Tyler's cruelty, but my father's silence, his complete unwillingness to protect me, to stand up for me, to acknowledge that I was his son and I deserved better. I used to think it was my fault, that there was something wrong with me, something that made me unlovable. I spent years trying to figure out what I had done wrong, how I could fix myself, how I could become someone worth caring about. It was not until I was older that I understood the truth. There was nothing wrong with me. There was something wrong with them. School was my refuge. I threw myself into my studies, not because I loved learning, but because it was an escape. Good grades meant teachers who praised me, who saw me, who treated me like I mattered. Good grades meant a future that did not include my father's house. I worked part-time jobs starting at 15, saving every penny I could. I knew I would need to leave as soon as I was legally able, and I knew no one was going to help me do it. I bagged groceries, mowed lawns, washed dishes at a diner. I hid the money in a box under my bed, counting it every night like a promise to myself. By the time my 18th birthday approached, I had saved almost $3,000, enough for a security deposit on a cheap apartment, maybe first month's rent, enough to survive until I could figure out my next steps. I had a plan: graduate high school in May, find a job, get my own place, start building a life that had nothing to do with my father or Patricia or Tyler, start becoming someone new. But my father had other plans. My 18th birthday fell on a Tuesday. I did not expect a party, did not expect presents or cake or any of the things that normal families did for birthdays. I had stopped expecting those things years ago. I just wanted to get through the day, go to school, come home, count down the weeks until graduation. When I came downstairs that morning, my father was sitting at the kitchen table with Patricia and Tyler. They were all looking at me with expressions I could not quite read, something between satisfaction and anticipation, like they had been waiting for this moment. "Nathan," my father said, "sit down." I sat. My stomach was already knotting with anxiety. Nothing good ever came from family meetings in this house. "You are 18 today," my father continued. "Legally an adult." "Yes, which means we are no longer legally responsible for you." The words landed like a punch. I knew what was coming even before he said it. "It is time for you to leave." Patricia smiled. That thin, satisfied smile I had seen 1,000 times. "We have discussed it extensively, and we feel this is the best decision for everyone." "You are kicking me out? On my birthday?" "We are giving you your independence," my father said, like he was doing me a favor. "You are always talking about how you cannot wait to be on your own. Well, now you can be. I have 3 months until graduation. I am still in high school. You can finish high school from wherever you end up. That is not our problem anymore." I looked at Tyler, who was practically glowing with satisfaction. This was probably the best birthday present he had ever received. "Where am I supposed to go?" "That is for you to figure out." My father stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. "We have packed your things. They are in garbage bags by the front door. I suggest you take them and go." Garbage bags? We did not see the point in wasting good luggage. I sat there for a long moment, trying to process what was happening. 18 years of being unwanted, and it was finally official. They were throwing me away like trash, right down to the garbage bags they had packed my belongings in. "What about my money?" I asked. "I have savings in my room." Patricia's smile widened. "We needed that for Tyler's college applications. You understand. He has such a bright future ahead of him." They had taken my money, $3,000 I had worked for, saved for, dreamed about. Gone. That was my money. I earned it. You earned it while living under our roof, eating our food, using our electricity. My father's voice was cold. "Consider it back rent." I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw things, break things, make them feel even a fraction of the pain they were causing me. But I had learned long ago that showing emotion in this house only made things worse. So I stood up. I walked to the front door. I picked up the 3 garbage bags that contained everything I owned in the world, and I walked out. "Happy birthday, Nathan," Tyler called after me, laughing. The door slammed shut behind me. I stood on the front porch for a long time, holding those garbage bags, trying to figure out what to do next. I had no money. I had no family. I had nowhere to go. The morning sun was just coming up, painting the neighborhood in soft gold light, and everyone else was probably still asleep, dreaming about normal lives and normal families and normal days. I had never felt more alone in my life. Eventually, I started walking. I walked to school because it was the only routine I had left. I hid the garbage bags in my locker, cramming them into a space that was never designed to hold a person's entire life. I went to my classes, pretending everything was normal. I took notes, answered questions, acted like this was just another Tuesday. When teachers asked if I was okay, I said I was fine. When friends asked what was wrong, I said nothing. I had learned long ago that showing weakness invited exploitation. I had learned that admitting you were struggling meant giving people ammunition to use against you later. After school, I retrieved my bags and walked to my car, a 15-year-old sedan I had bought with my own money 2 years ago. It barely ran, with a transmission that ground and an engine that knocked and a heater that only worked when it felt like it. But it was mine, the only thing in the world that was truly mine. I sat in the driver's seat and cried for the first time in years. Great, heaving sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside me, somewhere I had kept locked away for so long I had forgotten it existed. I cried for my mother, who had died and left me alone. I cried for my father, who had chosen a new family over me. I cried for the boy I used to be, who had believed that someday things would get better. When the tears finally stopped, I started the car and drove away from everything I had ever known. The next 9 days were the worst of my life. I slept in my car, parked in different locations each night to avoid attention. Walmart parking lots, rest stops, quiet residential streets where no one would notice a teenager sleeping in a beat-up sedan. I learned quickly that you could not stay in one place too long, that police officers would knock on your window and tell you to move along, that some neighborhoods called the cops on anyone who looked like they did not belong. I showered at the school gym before classes, grateful for the early morning access that athletics provided, even though I was not on any teams. I would arrive at 6 in the morning, before anyone else was there, and stand under the hot water until it turned cold, trying to feel human again. I ate whatever I could find, which was not much. The free lunch program at school helped on weekdays, and I would save half of it for dinner. On weekends, I went hungry. I learned where the day-old bread was discounted at the grocery store. I learned which fast food restaurants threw away the most food at the end of the night. I learned that hunger was not just a sensation but a constant companion, a gnawing emptiness that never quite went away. I applied for jobs, dozens of them. Fast food restaurants, retail stores, warehouses, anywhere that might hire an 18-year-old with no experience. But no one wanted to hire a homeless teenager with no permanent address, no phone number that worked reliably, no references except teachers who did not know I was living in my car. I looked into shelters, but they were full. I looked into social services, but the waiting lists were months long. I looked into programs for homeless youth, but most of them required documentation I did not have, forms that needed to be signed by parents or guardians who had thrown me away. The systems designed to catch people like me had too many holes, and I fell through all of them. By day 9, I was desperate. My car had run out of gas 2 days earlier, stranding me in a parking lot behind a strip mall. I had walked to school from there, over an hour each way, but I was too weak now to make the trip. I had not eaten in almost 48 hours. The world was starting to feel fuzzy around the edges, like a dream I could not quite wake up from. That is when I found myself digging through the dumpster behind a restaurant, looking for anything that might still be edible. Bread that was only slightly stale. Vegetables that had been thrown out because they were not pretty enough to sell. Anything with calories. Anything that would keep me going for one more day. That is when Richard Hartwell found me. Nathan Brooks. I spun around, ready to run. I had learned quickly that being homeless made you a target. People called the police on you for existing. Other homeless people sometimes tried to take what little you had. You learned to be wary of anyone who approached. But this man did not look like a threat. He looked like a lawyer from a movie, all pressed suit and confident posture, and expensive watch glinting in the afternoon sun. Who is asking? My name is Richard Hartwell. I have been looking for you for 3 days. He held up a business card. I represent the estate of James Brooks. Your grandfather. I do not have a grandfather. You do. Or rather, you did. He took a step closer, his expression softening as he took in my condition. Mr. Brooks passed away 3 weeks ago. He left you everything. But we need to talk about the conditions of the inheritance. That was how I ended up in the back of a black sedan, being driven to a law office in a part of town I had never visited, learning that everything I thought I knew about my family was a lie. Richard ordered food for me first. Real food from a real restaurant, delivered to the conference room where we sat surrounded by legal documents and family photographs I had never seen before. "Eat," he said. "Then we will talk." I ate. I ate like I had never seen food before, because I almost had not. I ate until my stomach hurt, until the shaking in my hands finally stopped, until I felt almost human again. Then Richard told me the truth. Your grandfather, James Brooks, was a successful businessman. He built a construction company from nothing, grew it over 40 years, and sold it for a substantial profit when he retired. He was also, according to everyone who knew him, a good man, kind, generous, devoted to his family. My father never mentioned him. That is because your father cut him off 20 years ago, right after your parents got married. Richard slid a photograph across the table. An older man with kind eyes and a warm smile, standing in front of a modest house. James did not approve of some of your father's choices, specifically his financial choices. Your father had a gambling problem in his 20s. James tried to help, tried to get him treatment, but your father resented the interference. When James refused to give him more money to cover his debts, your father cut him out completely. My father has a gambling problem? Had. As far as we know, he addressed it years ago. But the damage to their relationship was done. James never saw his son again after the falling out. Never met your mother. Never knew you existed until 6 months ago. How did he find out about me? He hired a private investigator. He was dying, you see. Cancer, same as your mother. He wanted to make amends before the end, wanted to reconnect with his son. Instead, he found you. Richard's voice softened. He found out that his grandson had been living in that house for 18 years, being treated like garbage, and he was devastated. He wanted to come get you immediately, but his lawyers advised against it. You were still a minor. Your father had legal custody. Any attempt to intervene could have made things worse. So he just watched. He watched, and he planned. He changed his will to leave everything to you, with specific provisions to ensure your father could not contest it. He set up a trust to protect the assets until you were ready to manage them yourself. He did everything he could to make sure that when you turned 18, you would have options. I looked at the photograph again. This man, this stranger, had done more for me in 6 months of watching from a distance than my father had done in 18 years of living in the same house. He wanted to meet me, Richard continued. He had a letter prepared, introducing himself, explaining everything. He was going to send it on your 18th birthday, invite you to visit, start building a relationship. He paused, but he died 2 weeks before your birthday. The cancer moved faster than anyone expected, so I never got to meet him. No, I am sorry. I sat with that for a long moment, grieving for a grandfather I had never known, for the relationship we could have had, for the family I had been denied by my father's pride and bitterness. You said there was a condition. I finally said, "What is it?" Richard nodded. James knew that inheriting a large sum of money at 18 could be overwhelming. He also knew that you would need guidance, support, someone to help you navigate the transition. So he included a condition in his will. He slid another document across the table. To receive your full inheritance, you must complete 1 year of living in his house, under the supervision of a guardian he appointed. During that year, you will receive a monthly allowance and access to educational opportunities, but the bulk of the estate will remain in trust. At the end of the year, if the guardian certifies that you have met the conditions, everything transfers to your complete control. What conditions? What do I have to do? Graduate high school. That was his first priority. He knew your education had been disrupted, and he wanted to ensure you had the foundation to build on. Richard ticked the requirements off on his fingers. Enroll in some form of higher education or vocational training. It does not have to be a 4-year university. Community college, trade school, anything that gives you skills and credentials. What else? Demonstrate basic financial literacy through a course he pre-selected. He was very specific about this. He had seen too many young people inherit money and squander it because they did not understand how to manage it. He wanted you to have the knowledge to protect what he was giving you. That seems reasonable. He thought so too. And finally, Richard hesitated, seeming to choose his words carefully. Stay away from your father and his family for the duration of the year. Stay away from them. James was concerned that your father might try to manipulate you once he learned about the inheritance. He had seen it happen before with other families, long-lost relatives, suddenly appearing when there was money to be had. He wanted to give you a year to establish yourself, to build confidence and independence, before you had to deal with that dynamic. Richard leaned forward, his expression serious. Your grandfather knew what your father was capable of. He had experienced it firsthand. He did not want his gift to you to become a tool for your father to exploit. The year of separation was designed to protect you, to give you time to understand your own worth before anyone could try to convince you otherwise. I almost laughed. Stay away from the people who had thrown me out like garbage? That was the easiest condition I could imagine. They had made it very clear they wanted nothing to do with me. Avoiding them would require no effort at all. Who is the guardian? Her name is Eleanor Vance. She was James's closest friend for the last 30 years of his life. A retired teacher, now in her 70s. She lives in the house you will be inheriting and has agreed to stay for the year to help you settle in. And if I do not agree to the conditions, then the estate goes to charity. Every penny. You receive nothing. It was not really a choice. I was homeless, broke, and desperate. Even if I had reservations about living with a stranger for a year, the alternative was going back to sleeping in my car. Where do I sign? The house was not what I expected. When Richard said I was inheriting a house, I imagined something modest, a small suburban home, maybe, or a simple apartment. What I got was a Victorian mansion on 3 acres of land, with a wraparound porch and a garden and more rooms than I could count. This is it? I asked, staring through the car window as we pulled up the long driveway. This is it. Your grandfather bought it 40 years ago for his wife. She loved Victorian architecture. After she passed, he could not bring himself to sell it. The front door opened as we approached, and a woman stepped out onto the porch. She was small and silver-haired, with bright eyes and a warm smile that reminded me painfully of the grandmother I had never had. You must be Nathan, she said, coming down the steps to meet me. I am Eleanor. Your grandfather talked about you constantly for the last 6 months. I feel like I already know you. He talked about me? Every day. He would show me pictures that investigator had taken, tell me about your grades and your jobs, and how hard you were working. Her eyes glistened. He was so proud of you, Nathan. So proud of the young man you were becoming despite everything. I did not know what to say. No one had ever been proud of me before. Come inside, Eleanor said, taking my arm like we were old friends. I will show you your room, and then we're going to get you a proper meal, a hot bath, and about 12 hours of sleep. You look like you need all 3. She was right. I needed all 3. The year that followed was the strangest, most healing, most transformative year of my life. Eleanor was nothing like the guardians I had imagined. I had expected someone strict, someone clinical, someone who would treat me like a problem to be managed rather than a person to be cared for. What I got was a 73-year-old retired teacher with a sharp wit, endless patience, and a genuine interest in who I was and who I wanted to become. She was not distant or cold. She was warm, present, endlessly kind. She treated me like family from the first day, insisting I call her Ellie instead of Mrs. Vance, making sure there was always food in the kitchen and clean sheets on my bed, sitting with me in the evenings to talk about everything and nothing. The first few weeks were strange. I did not know how to behave in a house where someone actually cared about me. I would flinch when Eleanor walked into a room, expecting criticism or demands or the cold silence I had grown up with. I would apologize constantly for taking up space, for eating food, for existing in a way that might inconvenience someone. Eleanor noticed. Of course she noticed. "Nathan," she said one evening, after I had apologized for the third time for sitting in the living room while she was reading, "you live here now. This is your home. You do not need to apologize for being in your own home." "I know. I am sorry. I caught myself and laughed awkwardly. Old habits. I understand. But we are going to break those habits, one day at a time." She patted the seat next to her on the couch. "Come sit with me. I want to tell you about your grandfather." She told me stories about my grandfather that night and many nights after, about his childhood, growing up poor in rural Pennsylvania, the son of a factory worker and a seamstress, about how he had scraped together enough money to start his own construction company at 25, building one house at a time until he had crews working across the state, about his marriage to my grandmother, a woman named Ellen who had died of a stroke 15 years ago. "He never got over losing her," Eleanor said, "just like he never got over losing your father. He spent the last years of his life with 2 holes in his heart, wondering what he had done wrong, why the people he loved had left him." "My father left him? I thought he died." "No, dear. Your father cut him off completely. James tried everything to reconnect. Letters, phone calls, even showing up at his house once. Your father called the police and had him removed from the property." "Why?" Eleanor sighed. "Money mostly. Your father had a gambling problem when he was young. He got into debt, serious debt, the kind that attracts dangerous people. James bailed him out once, twice, 3 times, but he refused to do it a 4th time. He told your father that he would pay for treatment, pay for therapy, pay for anything that would actually help. But he would not enable the addiction anymore, and my father never forgave him. Some people cannot accept help that comes with conditions. Some people would rather burn every bridge than admit they have a problem." She reached over and squeezed my hand. "Your grandfather spent years wondering if he had done the right thing, whether he should have just kept giving money, kept the peace, maintained the relationship at any cost. But he believed that enabling destruction was not love, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is say no. I thought about that for a long time, about my grandfather, drawing a line and losing his son because of it, about my father, choosing his pride over his family, about all the choices that had led to me sitting in this mansion with a stranger who felt more like family than anyone I had ever known. He would have adored you," Eleanor told me one night, both of us sitting on the porch watching fireflies dance in the garden. It had become our evening ritual, sitting together as the sun went down, talking about life and dreams and all the things I had never had anyone to share with before. "You are so much like him," she continued. "The way you work hard without complaining, the way you treat people with kindness even when they do not deserve it, the way you keep going even when everything seems impossible. I do not feel like I keep going. I feel like I am barely surviving. That is keeping going, dear. That is exactly what it is. Survival when everything is against you. That is courage, Nathan. That is strength." I finished high school with honors, graduating in a ceremony where Eleanor sat in the front row and cried happy tears. She had insisted on throwing me a small party afterward, just the 2 of us and a few friends I had made at school, with a cake that said, "Congratulations, Nathan," in blue frosting and candles that I actually got to blow out. It was the first birthday party anyone had ever thrown for me. I enrolled in community college that fall, planning to transfer to a 4-year university after completing my basics. Eleanor drove me to campus on my first day, reminding me to eat lunch and call her if I needed anything, treating me like a son going off to school instead of a legal obligation she had agreed to supervise. I took the financial literacy course my grandfather had specified, learning about investments and budgeting and compound interest and all the things no one had ever taught me. The instructor was a retired financial advisor who had known my grandfather personally. He took extra time with me, explaining concepts until I understood them, sharing stories about James's business philosophy and approach to money. Your grandfather believed that wealth was a tool, not a goal, he told me. He said that money should be used to build things, help people, create opportunities. That hoarding, it was a waste of the gift you had been given. I took those words to heart. I still try to live by them. And I stayed away from my father, which was easier than I expected. He did not try to contact me. None of them did. I suppose they assumed I had simply disappeared, become another homeless statistic, stopped being their problem. They did not know about the inheritance. They did not know I was living in a mansion, healing from the damage they had caused, building a life they could never have imagined for me. At the end of the year, Eleanor signed the papers certifying that I had met all the conditions. "You have grown so much," she said, hugging me tight. "Your grandfather would be so proud." "Thank you," I said, "for everything, for being here, for not giving up on me." "Oh, sweetheart." She pulled back, her eyes wet with tears. "You are the one who did not give up. You are the one who survived everything they threw at you and came out stronger. I just provided a soft place to land." The money transferred to my control the next day. $4.7 million, suddenly mine to manage. I remember sitting in Richard's office, signing the final paperwork, watching the numbers appear on the screen of my new bank account. More money than I had ever imagined. More money than most people would see in their entire lives. My first instinct was to panic. What if I lost it all? What if I made mistakes? What if I proved that my father had been right about me all along, that I was useless and incapable and destined to fail? But then I remembered what the financial literacy instructor had taught me, what my grandfather had believed, that money was a tool, not a goal, that the purpose of wealth was to build things, help people, create opportunities. I did not go crazy with it. I did not buy fancy cars or take extravagant vacations or do any of the things people imagine doing when they suddenly become rich. Instead, I invested most of it, following the principles I had learned in the financial literacy course. Conservative, diversified, focused on long-term growth rather than quick gains. I kept living in my grandfather's house, which felt like home now. The rooms that had seemed overwhelming at first had become familiar, filled with memories of evenings with Eleanor and quiet mornings with coffee and books. I could not imagine living anywhere else. I continued my education, transferring to a state university to study business. My grandfather had built his fortune through hard work and smart decisions. I wanted to understand how he had done it, to continue his legacy with the same principles that had guided him. And I reached out to my father. I know that sounds strange after everything he did, but I had questions. Questions about my grandfather, about my mother, about why he had made the choices he made. I needed to understand. We met at a coffee shop, neutral territory. My father looked older than I remembered, smaller somehow. The man who had loomed so large in my childhood now seemed diminished. "I heard about the inheritance," he said, not meeting my eyes. "I suppose you think you won." "I do not think this is about winning or losing. Your grandfather always did enjoy making me look bad." There was bitterness in his voice, old and deep, even from the grave. "He was not trying to make you look bad. He was trying to help me. By cutting me out, by giving everything to a kid he never even met. By giving something to the grandson you threw out on his 18th birthday. The grandson you stole $3,000 from. The grandson you treated like garbage for 14 years. My father finally looked at me. I did what I thought was best. You did what was easiest. There is a difference. We sat in silence for a long moment. I realized I was not angry anymore. I had expected to be angry, had prepared speeches in my head about all the ways he had failed me. But looking at him now, all I felt was pity. Pity for a man who had thrown away his father and his son, who had chosen bitterness over love, who would probably spend the rest of his life wondering what might have been different. I am not going to give you money, I said quietly. I know that is probably why you agreed to meet. He flinched. I had guessed right. But I want you to know that I do not hate you. I am not going to spend my life being angry about what you did. You made your choices, and I am making mine. My choice is to move forward, to build something good, to be the kind of person my grandfather would have been proud of. I stood up, leaving money on the table for the coffee. Goodbye, Dad. I hope you find some peace. I walked out of that coffee shop and never looked back. It has been 3 years since that meeting. 3 years since I walked out of that coffee shop and left my old life behind. 3 years of healing, growing, becoming the person I was always meant to be. I graduated from university last spring, top of my class in business management. The ceremony was held in a huge auditorium. Thousands of students in matching caps and gowns, families cheering from the stands. Eleanor was there, of course, sitting in the front row with a sign that said, "Go Nathan," in glittery letters. My aunt had flown in from Oregon, crying before my name was even called. When I walked across that stage to receive my diploma, I thought about the boy who had sat in a car 9 days after his 18th birthday, crying because he had no one and nothing. I thought about the kid who had dug through dumpsters for food, who had slept in parking lots, who had wondered if anyone would notice if he just disappeared. That boy felt like a different person now, a version of myself from another life, another timeline, another reality entirely. I took over my grandfather's old construction company after graduation. The trust had maintained it in my absence, keeping the crews working and the projects moving, waiting for me to be ready. The company was smaller than it had been in its heyday, but it was solid, built on a reputation for quality work and fair dealing that my grandfather had spent 40 years establishing. Learning the business from the ground up has been humbling. I started by shadowing the foreman, watching how projects moved from design to completion. I spent time in the office, understanding the finances and the contracts and the endless paperwork that kept everything running. I made mistakes, plenty of them, but the people who had worked for my grandfather were patient with me. They had loved him, and they wanted to see his legacy continue. Your grandfather would be proud, one of the older foremen told me after we completed our first major project under my leadership. You have got his eye for detail and his way with people. This company is in good hands. Those words meant more to me than any amount of money ever could. Eleanor still lives in the house with me. She turned 80 last month, slower than she used to be, needing a cane now to get around the bigger rooms. But her mind is still sharp, her wit still razor-like, her capacity for love still infinite. She is the grandmother I never had, the family I always needed. I cannot imagine my life without her. We still sit on the porch every evening when the weather allows, watching the fireflies come out, talking about the day and the future and all the things that matter. Sometimes she tells me more stories about my grandfather. Sometimes I tell her about my work, about the projects we are building, about the lives we are touching. Sometimes we just sit in comfortable silence, two people who found each other when they needed it most. I hired a private investigator last year, the same firm my grandfather had used, not to find my father, but to find my mother's family. She had a sister, it turned out, who had lost touch with her after she married my father. The investigator tracked her down to a small town in Oregon, where she had been living with her husband and 3 children, wondering for 18 years what had happened to her sister's son. My aunt's name is Catherine. She is 52 years old, with my mother's eyes and my mother's laugh, and a photo album full of pictures I had never seen. Pictures of my mother as a child, as a teenager, as a young woman in love. Pictures that proved she had existed, that she had been real, that my memories of warmth and kindness were not just dreams I had invented. We met last Christmas at her house in Oregon. She cried when she saw me, said I looked just like my mother, said she had tried to find me after my mother died, but my father had refused to let her see me. He had cut off all of my mother's family, just like he had cut off his own. She would be so proud of you, my aunt told me, holding my hands in hers while tears streamed down both our faces. She used to talk about what kind of mother she wanted to be. Patient, loving, present. She wanted you to know every single day that you were wanted and loved. She told me that, I said, my voice breaking, the last thing she said to me, that I was loved, that I was wanted, that I was exactly who I was supposed to be. That sounds like Michelle. My aunt smiled through her tears. She always knew exactly what people needed to hear. I spent a week with my aunt's family that Christmas. Met her husband, who welcomed me like I had always been part of the family. Met my cousins who ranged from teenagers to young adults, all of them curious about their newly discovered relative. Ate home-cooked meals at a crowded table, opened presents by a decorated tree, experienced for the first time what a normal family Christmas was supposed to look like. It was overwhelming and wonderful and heartbreaking all at once. Mourning what I had missed while celebrating what I had found. I do not know what my future holds. I have money now, security, opportunities one never could have imagined when I was sleeping in my car and wondering if I would survive to see my next birthday. But more than that, I have family. Not the one I was born into, but the one I built. Eleanor, who saved me when I did not know I needed saving. My Aunt Catherine, who is making up for 18 years of lost time. The friends I have made along the way, people who know my story and love me anyway. The memory of a grandfather who loved me from a distance and gave me everything when he could finally reach me. That is what family really means, I have learned. Not blood, not obligation, not the people who are supposed to love you, but do not. Family is the people who choose you, the people who see you struggling and reach out their hands, the people who believe in you when you have stopped believing in yourself. My grandfather never got to meet me, but he saved me anyway. Every day, I try to be worthy of that gift. I try to be kind, to be generous, to see people who are struggling and help them the way he helped me. I hired a homeless teenager last month, a kid who reminded me of myself, and set him up with an apartment and a chance to prove himself. I donate to shelters and programs for homeless youth, trying to catch some of the kids who fall through the cracks the way I almost did. I try to be the person my grandfather believed I could be, even when he only knew me through photographs and reports. I am Nathan Brooks. I was homeless at 18, digging through dumpsters for food, wondering if anyone in the world cared whether I lived or died. Now I am 21, running a construction company, living in a mansion, surrounded by people who love me. The journey from that dumpster to this office was not easy. There were days when I doubted everything, when the trauma of my childhood threatened to overwhelm the progress I had made. There were nights when I woke up in a cold sweat, certain that it had all been a dream, that I was still sleeping in my car in some parking lot, alone and forgotten. But those moments passed. They always passed. And on the other side was always Eleanor, with her steady presence and her endless faith. Always my Aunt Catherine, with her weekly phone calls and her open door. Always the memory of a grandfather who loved me sight unseen, who gambled his entire legacy on a boy he had never met. And every night, Before I go to sleep, I look at that photograph of my grandfather and I say thank you. Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for believing in me. Thank you for the condition that saved my life. Thank you for listening to my story of growing up faster than I ever wanted to. I have left 2 more stories on your screen, both from young men who learned that sometimes becoming an adult does not happen at 18. It happens the moment your family needs you to be strong. Click on whichever one speaks to you. And if you want to join our community of people who understand what it is like to be forced to grow up overnight, that notification bell is waiting. Until tomorrow, remember, age is just a number, but courage defines who you really are.